My name is Trevor Lecca. I'm Dubsado's product education lead, and today's webinar is all about podcasting. It's how to automatically book guests with Dubsado and to stop chasing those guests and use Dubsado to your advantage. So today's guest, Taylor Hedden, is a frequent host here on our webinars. She's come on before, and she was lovely in the past. We are very excited to have her back again today. And in case you don't know Taylor, she is one of the original Dubsado certified specialists. She's the founder of Chanel and Lee, and she's completed over 200 custom Dubsado builds. So she's going to be a fantastic resource, talking specifically about how to set up your Dubsado for podcasting. She's currently taking on new clients, and she's got some robust offerings and templates on her website, chanellee.com. I'm sure she'll plug those at the end if you're interested. But otherwise, I cannot wait to hear what Taylor has to say about podcasting, since she does also run one herself. So she's speaking from experience. But let's go ahead and bring on Taylor Hedden. Go ahead and grab her in here. Let's see. Oops. There we go. All right. Give it 1 second for her to jump in here. It's going. One second, folks. Thanks for bearing with me here. It says it's going. There it is. Perfect. Hi, Taylor.
Hi, how's it going?
Going great. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for the lovely intro.
Yeah, no, of course. Thank you again for joining us here again today. Like I said, I appreciate your time, and I'm really happy to have you back on since you were so good last time. So take it away.
Awesome. Always a fun time on these webinars. Let me know if you can see my slides. I'm going to go ahead and get in presenter mode. Trevor, let me know in the chat if you can see those okay. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Taylor Hedden. I am so excited to be back for another webinar. Before we get started, I would love if you are watching live to go ahead and drop in the chat what you do and let me know if you are a podcast host. I know a lot of people join these webinars because I love to give all of the information, and I know that there are a lot of other systems experts, online business managers, or Dubsado specialists who love to get all of the info to help their own clients. So in the chat, let me know what you do. And if you are a podcast host, let me know that as well. As Trevor politely mentioned, I am Taylor. I have been a Dubsado certified specialist since the beginning of the specialist program and have had my eyes on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of businesses. And for the webinar this time, I was like, I want to talk about something new, something I haven't taught in the online space before. I've done so many webinars and master classes and all things workflows and client experience. And I realized recently, after chatting with some other podcast hosts, how much of a time suck it can be managing the podcast. And then you add on layers of guest interviews and marketing, and it can truly feel like an entire another business. I myself am a podcast host. I've been podcasting since 2022. And today I'm going to show you the actual workflows in my account that I use. And I'm going to hand you everything you need. So you don't even have to hire me after this. You can just take all the screenshots, watch this recording, and make your life 10 times easier when it comes to your podcast, or even maybe podcasts you manage or clients of yours who want to hire you to build out their podcast workflows. So if you're just joining, make sure you tell me in the chat what you do. If you are a podcast host, I would love to know. Before we get started, I go all in on my webinars. If you've been here before, you know I don't hold back. So go ahead and close out the tabs, close Instagram, get something to take some notes on. I'm going to be sharing you exact frameworks for you to walk away with. And today's webinar will probably be around 30 minutes, a little on the shorter side than what I normally do, because I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So stick around at the end. I will be answering questions regardless if it's related to the podcast subject or just Dubsado in general, or any questions you have with your own workflows or automations. I'm here to make sure all the questions are answered. So go ahead and jot them down. You can also drop them in the chat as I'm teaching. And if I have the chance to peek at it and, answer in the moment, I absolutely will. If not, we will go back through those questions at the end. So feel free to drop them in there as we go. Hi, Anna. Hi, Ruby. Hi, Amelia. Nikki. I'm seeing some familiar names, which I love. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into exactly what I'm going to be teaching you today. When it comes to your guest outreach, the prep, the follow-up, all of the moving parts that happen when you are bringing a guest onto your podcast, we're going to talk about First of all, why guests are so important for podcasting. And then I'm going to show you how to actually automate from guest submission or guest invite through the actual scheduling of the episode, all of the pre prep, the reminders, the intake, and then, of course, the follow up, because I love the follow up and really making sure we end the experience on a high note. And we're going to look at all of this through the lens of Dubsado, the exact things to use, the exact features, and the exact workflows, again, for you to screenshot and take and run with them. So let's start with this because historically, I always start with a stat. I want to make this a real life scenario for you. So if you are a podcaster or you are a podcast host, you might be surprised to know that 89% of podcast listeners say they have been introduced to new shows through guests. That number is absolutely insane. If you're not already utilizing guests as podcast content, this is such an amazing opportunity to grow your podcast, to get new eyes or new listeners on your brand, and to really expand your reach organically, right? It's most of the time completely free to bring a guest on. And this just shows the power of having guests on and how many listeners are exposed to podcasts because someone they follow or someone they like was a guest on a show. Now, this just shows that it's one of the most effective ways to grow your podcast audience. I know from experience, it can feel a little tiresome, and bringing in guests has been an insane way to just grow the show, grow listens, grow people who want to continue tuning in. Now, in the same breath, and this stat is also a little scary, but nearly half of podcasters spend more than 10 hours per episode on planning, recording, editing. You add in outreach, you add in marketing. That's almost a part-time job just from podcasting. And so I know that with the workflows I'm going to show you today, we can automate some of that so that way you can free up your hours, make some more room to focus on creating great content. And I'm sure you have a million other things that you do, whether it's other businesses or family or hobbies. And so we really want to make, like anything, make it as efficient as possible. And that's going to happen with Dubsado and the power that we have in Dubsado. So let's talk about how we can actually start booking our guests. So really, when we're looking at guests, there's two ways we bring guests onto the show. For some of you, you might just invite guests outright. I do this very often. You have a friend, you have a referral, they would make a great guest, and you want to invite them onto the show and make it really seamless for them to go ahead and get on your schedule. Now, some podcasts might also have applications, which if you don't, or submissions perhaps, if you don't, I highly suggest this as well. This might look like a tab on your website or maybe a link in your Instagram bio or somewhere wherever your podcast is promoted where guests can actually apply or submit themselves to show up as a guest on the podcast. So we have these two methods of entering our scheduling funnel. Now let's start with when a guest applies. This is just a cutesy little chart I made for you here. And then when we get to the next slides, we're going to actually open up Dubsado on the screen. And by the way, if you are a systems expert, I saw a couple of specialists in the comments here. This is my favorite app called Funalytics. Shameless plug. This is where I map all of my Dubsado workflows before I put them into Dubsado. So I'm going to kind of help you visualize, right, how we can have guest applications. It's going to start from your lead capture form. Now, if you're new to Dubsado and you're not totally sure what some of the language is here, don't worry. We're going to hop into Dubsado. I'm going to show you the actual places and all of the things. If you are familiar, a lead capture is essentially like a contact form. And so having a lead capture solely for your guest applications or submissions, that can trigger a nice little set of actions here to move them through the pipeline. So as soon as a guest applies to be on the show, we can have an automatic email response that says something like, "Thanks so much for applying to be a guest. I'm currently looking over your info to make sure we're a good fit for you or for us. We'll be in touch shortly." And of course, here's where kind of a manual pause in our workflow will happen, where the podcast host or producer or whoever is responsible for this stage is going to review that lead capture and make sure it is a good fit before we move forward with initiating the booking workflow. Pretty simple, right? Now, the great thing about how I've set this up is no matter if they're a guest that applies or if they're a guest that we invite, the same workflow is going to be initiated if we move forward. That just means less variables, less workflows you have to manage. We have two ways to come in the funnel and then one actual booking workflow that I'm going to put on the screen here in just a minute. So we have our guests that apply to be on the show, and then we have our guests that we invite. Same method of entering the funnel, but two different forms, right? We have our application. And I might not have changed that right there, my bad. We have our application for the ones who are applying, and then we can have a really simple form for those who we are inviting, and that form is going to capture that guest and immediately start our booking workflow to trigger that scheduling process. This makes it so easy. So that way, whenever I want to invite someone, all I have to do is pop into a DM or a text or an email and say, "Hey, Nicole, I really want you on the podcast. Just fill out this quick form and it'll send you everything you need to know to get booked." Easy peasy. Now, let me go ahead and exit screen here, and I'm going to pop into Dubsado. Now, this is my actual Dubsado account, which normally I'm never in my real account, but because this is a podcast account, I do have a separate brand. So the great thing about Dubsado for my users listening who are already a user with Dubsado, you already have an account, you can add an additional brand for a low cost. I think it's $10. Correct me if I'm wrong, Trevor, if that's still the price. So that way you can manage your podcast in a separate brand from your business. Now, if you don't want to have a separate brand, you could also create these same workflows in the account that you already use with just having, workflows and forms that are labeled accordingly to the podcast. So in our templates area, let me show you our lead capture forms. Again, if you're new to Dubsado, these are beautiful because these forms automatically plug in this person to your system so you can begin the automations and of course track your guest in these project statuses. So you'll see I have two different forms here, one for guests to submit themselves and one for invited guests. Now, I do take this a little further. So in the actual form, we'll see some questions here applicable, like their details, why they might be a good fit, potential topics they want to discuss. I then take our lead capture and plug that into my website. So on my website, when you head to my podcast, these forms are already plugged in, really giving it that seamless appearance that aligns with my podcast page. But all of this, what you see here, is your Dubsado form plugged in. Now, if you're like, wait, I don't have a podcast website, no worries. You can always design these forms, add your logo or add some text, and use the direct link as well. So again, popping this into your link in bio or linking this anywhere where you might want people to submit themselves. Same thing over here with my invited guest. I have a private link that I'll send to guests where they can go ahead and get that process started. It kind of bypasses some of the other guest details. And of course, it doesn't have some of these questions because I already have vetted that guest and I just want them to have a really quick entry point into that scheduling process. So that's our first step of getting this lead capture created so we can actually start the scheduling process. So next, once we have invited the guest or we've confirmed that we're a good fit for the submission, we are going to go ahead and get them on the calendar. Now, this is where things get kind of fun. And if you're not familiar with automation, don't worry, I'll walk you through this, but it's a very simple workflow process. And again, this same workflow can be used for both your invited guest or your submission guest, right? Because the language is going to be applicable to both in how you set up those emails. So what's included? As soon as in those two different routes we saw here, whether they come through our lead capture and this workflow is initiated, or they submit their application and we confirm that it's a good fit, our automated booking workflow can get started. So what we're seeing here is we're actually going to utilize Dubsado schedulers to have them schedule their own interview time on the podcast. I swear by scheduling. I know some people are a little scared of having their schedule out in the open, but especially when it's something like podcasting and you want people to just get their times and dates on the calendar without all the back and forth. Dubsado scheduling makes it super easy. I'll open it up here in just a second where they can select a date and time and get that put directly on your calendar. Now, once the client or the guest in this case has actually booked their appointment, that's when we see all of these booking details initiated. So we can update project statuses so you know from a bird's eye view who's actually booked and who you're waiting on. We can send a guest agreement if you have one. Also, an intake questionnaire. Highly recommend one of these. I'll show you some of the questions I use on mine. And because people can be forgetful, it happens, we're also going to follow up with them. If that guest intake isn't completed in a couple of days, we're going to make sure we send it again so we have all of those details, like their bio and what topics are off limits and all of the good stuff. And then, of course, once the appointment has ended in this scenario, once the interview is over, we will have a workflow for our post interview process. Now, as you can see, this is completely automated. There are no approvals, there are no edits I need to make. Once they schedule that appointment, we are good to go. I'm also going to show you the scheduler here, and then we're going to go back into Dubsado. What I love about scheduling with the schedulers itself and not having some kind of manual process are a couple of things. First of all, automated reminders. As I said, people can be forgetful, right? And so we don't want to be wasting our time putting a guest on the calendar and them not showing up. And so making sure that we are following up with reminders and prep details can make or break the experience you have with a guest recording on the podcast. I know when I first started my guest podcast recordings for Ironically Serious, I had some struggles with making sure guests knew how to set up their mic and they knew to put their dogs away or whatever it might be, wear headphones, right? So you'll see with our Dubsado schedulers, we can actually prep these reminders based on the appointment. This is my preferred reminder cadence. So go ahead and screenshot this. I love to send something a couple days before, really giving them all of the prep details, what they need to do, what they should bring, what we're going to talk about. Then 3 hours before, kind of in the morning, since most of my podcasts are in the afternoon, I give them a final nudge, just reminding them today is recording day and a little bit of info again on what to do and how to prepare. And then lastly, a 30-minute alert right before the recording set to start to send them the link again, just to make sure they have that link for easy access and they're not scrambling at the last minute trying to join. Now, this can obviously be customized according to what fits best for you and for your guest. And of course, you have even more settings within your scheduler to customize further, right? A lot of the times, my clients are scared to use the schedulers because they're like, oh, well, am I going to have time in between? And is it going to read my calendar? And all of those things that happen. And the answer is yes. The schedulers in Dubsado make it super, super simple to really customize the scheduling. So it's exactly what you want it as the business owner, as the podcast host, right? So as you can see here in this scheduler, we have a pretty simple setup with our appointment type, how long I schedule these interviews for, how far out in advance they can actually book on my calendar. Who knows what's going to be happening in 60 days? I don't even know if I'm going to be alive in 60 days, right? So 45 rolling day window. We can set up all of our slots here. So if you prefer maybe having a couple of Friday slots, or maybe you only record certain days of the week, maybe you want to have a morning and a night because some people work in the day. You can set up as many availability slots as you want within these schedulers. Now, how do they actually join the interview? This is really going to depend on what software you use when you're hosting your podcast. I love Riverside FM. I've been using it since I started. Super great podcasting recording studio and app. And the great thing about that app and software is they do give you a studio recording link. It is a link just for guests, meaning if I pop this into the location on the scheduler, that's what my potential guest is going to see. And when they click that link, it's going to take them right into my studio. And so when I'm ready to start recording with them, I can admit them into the studio and we are on our way. So this makes it so simple just to have that link in multiple places, not only in the location of the scheduler, but also in the follow-up emails and all of the prep emails as well. Now, here's where I said we can make things a little bit more advanced depending on you and your preferences, right? How soon in advance can they book? Do we want to make sure someone can't book an episode tomorrow, right? You might want to have some time to prep. You might also want a little bit more time here if you're sending some kind of intake questionnaire to make sure they have the time to fill that out. We can create buffer time in between. So that way, if you're recording multiple episodes in one day, you're not doing them back to back. Give yourself a little bit of breathing room, right? And all of our beautiful communication settings. They'll see a nice welcome message at the top. They're going to get a confirmation email that their interview is scheduled. and all of those lovely reminders that I have set that you can customize even further. You can do as many as you want, as little as you want. It's completely up to you. Now, if we look over at our forms, let me go ahead and show you the guest intake questionnaire, and then we're going to hop into the workflow so you can get a real good visual of that booking process, right? The guest intake questionnaire is so important, in my opinion, as a podcast host. Usually, if I'm inviting someone, I know a lot of the information about them, or I already have topics in mind that I want to ask them on the podcast. But especially for those guests who are applying to be on and you have no idea who they are, this questionnaire can really make sure you have everything you need to interview them well. And so, just to give you a quick peek, again, this will be recorded. So, if you want to go back later and literally copy my questions, I'm an open book, no problem. I'll capture all of their details, especially, guys, this is huge. How to pronounce their name. The amount of times I've showed up on a podcast and I'm like, is this how you say it? It's fine, but it would be nice if you had that up front, right? If they have a nickname, pronouns, their contact information, and then we can ask all kinds of questions about them. What do they want to be known for? If you're a B2B podcast, maybe we're talking about business. We have a bio. For me, I'm a self help podcast. So I'm looking to ask things like, what are you most proud of? What's the biggest challenge you've had? Relationship status. Are any topics off limit? This is a really powerful one as well to keep in your intake. So that way you can go ahead and make sure that you've covered your bases and you don't have to backtrack or cut too much out of your podcast time. And then what I love about these forms in Dubsado is you can also have them upload directly to the form. So I'm asking for things like some images or anything I can use to promote their episode, whether they want to drop in a link maybe to a folder or actually upload images directly to the form. They can do both of those. And we can also kind of utilize the questions in certain ways here within Dubsado to confirm, right? Things like, do you have the rights for these photos? Sometimes people don't, and I want to make sure I'm not getting in trouble for that. Have you confirmed you've uploaded headshots? Yes, we're all set. And of course, asking if there's anything else they might have questions on. So this is a pretty simple form. I'm going to share some more with you at the end about freebies and what we can do with that, but definitely make sure you screenshot that to get those questions. Yes, Trevor just said the slides will be shared too. So that way you can just copy the slides if you prefer. Now we can also use a guest agreement in here. I keep this pretty simple. I purchased one, but this will allow you to make sure that, you've confirmed you're allowed to use their info, all of that legal schmiegel. Definitely advise with a lawyer or purchase a template if you need help with that. The great thing is Dubsado makes it super, super easy for you to sign and send. So in that onboarding workflow, we can send that agreement directly to the potential guest so they can sign and all our bases are covered. Now let's go to the fun part, our workflow. I mentioned how we have, of course, our booking, and then we go into, or our submission, I should say, and then we go into our booking. So because this is just my podcast account, I don't have a whole lot of workflows here. And again, if you already have an account and you're not wanting to create a separate one, you can always create these workflows and use them in the same brand that you're using for your business or for whatever else you have Dubsado for. So with our guest submission, the simple one I showed you in the beginning, this is obviously being triggered or initiated from our lead capture. Again, the beauty of lead captures that can be submitted. And as soon as it is, we can have workflows being automated. So you'll see that we're sending that outreach email or the thank you for, your inquiry. And we're creating a task for the host to review and make sure it's a good fit. As soon as they've reviewed and check off that it's a good fit, we're going to start that guest booking workflow. That same guest booking workflow is what's initiated from the invite form when I'm bringing a guest in. So let me kind of show you. Again, I know I have different levels of expertise on the pod or on this webinar, whether you're brand new or whether you are really used to workflows. But just to kind of give you a quick peek at how this can work, once the workflow is initiated, no matter where it came from, you could even be putting people in here manually by creating the project and starting this guest workflow yourself as well, if you don't want them to fill out some kind of form. So that's always an option. As soon as we do that, though, we're able to send that appointment scheduler, attach it to a really nice email. You guys know I'm all about communication. So really making it super simple for them to understand, hey, here's how you book your interview date. Once you do that, here's what's going to happen next. Once you do that, we're going to get on the podcast. It's going to be amazing. So all of your canned emails can be pre-typed, pre-saved, again, so you never have to lift a finger, and those will automatically be sent in that workflow. From here, like I said, this workflow is completely waiting on that guest to book a spot on the calendar. And whether they do it right in that moment or they do it a week from now, the rest of this workflow will continue to trigger from that appointment being scheduled. It's going to move them to my status as booked, so I know who all has booked a date on the calendar. As soon as they do book that scheduler, it's going to add it to my calendar. I'm going to see it on my phone, on the app. I'm going to get an email notification. You'll know when someone has booked. It's very clear. And then from there, we're doing a couple of things. I'm adding the agreement to their project. And then I'm sending a really simple onboarding email, just a few more things here to complete for them. They'll already have received their booking confirmation from that scheduler. So this email is just informational. I'm asking them to sign their agreement, plugging in that smart fields. If you're not familiar with smart fields, this just makes it really easy to pull info and variables from that project. So it's going to pull in that contract I added. It's going to send over my intake questionnaire, which we've attached here. And then it's going to let them know, hey, once you've done that, we're all ready to prep. I also have a little bonus page on my website with some more guest info for them. I repeat things a million times. And if you're a podcast host, you know, most likely your guests are not paying to be on the podcast. They are doing it out of, a favor, or they're doing it for exposure or whatever it might be. And most of the times you're not paying someone else to be on the podcast. So it really is a give and take. And I've realized the more information you share and the more you say it, the easier it will be for them to follow through with it. No lie, whether it's prep details or making sure they complete the form or repeating what the steps are, making sure that is communicated from start to finish is going to ensure they have a great experience and ultimately you have a great episode, right? Because the last thing you want to do is spend all this time recording and prepping all this and then the episode flops. So these intake prep details are all in those canned emails. Again, that nice reminder. And then we have the podcast interview. Now, once we've had the podcast interview, we can take it a couple steps further. So I'm going to come back over here. And remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in. We will have plenty of time to answer at the end of the call. So don't forget the final details. I'm all about making the experience beautiful from the start through the finish. So even after the episode ends, there's a couple of things we can automate here as well. And of course, this is going to depend on your style, how you release episodes, your flow, your process. One thing I would recommend, no matter what your process looks like, is creating a pretty simple post-interview follow-up workflow. So this workflow can be triggered as soon as that appointment is over. You could even spread it out a little bit, a couple hours after the appointment ends, just so they're not getting that email as you're literally clocking off of the interview. But here's where we can send a really great thank you email. Just really, again, thanking them for their time, a recap if you already have scheduled air dates or you have next steps on how they can collaborate or what kind of content you're going to send over. This would be a great time to send all of that in that nice thank you email. Now, if you're using Dubsado a little bit more and you want to kind of take it a step further, we can add tasks into the workflows. So for myself, I'm going to confirm an episode air date and I'm going to add it to the project. So now that we've recorded, I have a set date of when that episode is going to air and it's all in there. So I don't forget to follow up with them when the episode goes live. Now, from here is where we can then go ahead and even take it further with some marketing or additional flows and steps during that editing to post phase when that episode is being prepared. So let me give you a couple ideas here. First of all, this is totally going to help you maintain some kind of workflow for yourself as well. Although we're not necessarily doing a ton of communication other than maybe hey, your interview's going live. Again, you can add as many tasks as you want in these flows to keep you up to speed with the episode and keep it on a timeline, right? So things like adding the folder link to the project for marketing material, scheduling an email to let them know it's going to be live soon, emailing them when it does go live, right? With any of those materials and things that they might need. Some more ideas for you to keep them engaged, get better reach. Remember, having guests on your podcast is organic marketing. You most likely are not paying for this, so you want to do as much as possible to make it successful. So, a couple other ideas you can add in. I don't necessarily do all of these, but if you have that pre air date set or that air date set, we can do things like some check ins leading up to, reminding them of it, getting them excited for it. We can send graphics, videos, TikToks, whatever kind of assets you want them to share. I love that we can add that to a Google Drive and plug it into their client portal. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. We can send a review reminder a few days after their episode goes live, asking them to leave a review for the podcast. Go onto Spotify and add 5 stars, right? We can do some touch points for cross promotion. Maybe a week after the podcast ends, we want to check in and say, hey, is there any other way that we can amplify your podcast, right? Did let's do a newsletter collab. Let's do an Instagram live together, whatever it might be. And of course, tasks for the host to continue to do some of those back end tasks like follow ups, checking in on your guest, maybe even setting a reminder for 6 months later to have them back on, right? These are just some ideas of things you can automate even further in the workflow. And to hop back in over to the workflow, let me go ahead and show you. So, our post interview, keeping it very simple. Once again, this can trigger right after your interview has ended. I have mine set for a day later. And that's where we can start to add some of those, whether it's an email, whether it's a task, or whether we want to trigger even more workflows based on a date. So in this scenario, just to clarify, they are booking a appointment for the interview. And then I love to set their air date as the project date. This is a preference, once again. That way I can utilize that project date for more communication. So you'll see in the EP marketing, in the episode marketing, I'm sending this email 7 days before the start because that's the day of the air. Or the day of the start, I'm approving this email and plugging in the link to the direct episode. So you have a lot of options for how you want to make that follow-up process. But the key thing here, and again, when you get those slides, screenshot, copy this, set this up exactly as it is, and you will have super easy automated scheduling for your guest. Now I've got a couple more slides and we'll get into Q&A just to wrap things up here. Less struggling, more flow. I am a firm believer that the more that you can automate in your business, I promise you, you will have more headspace for the things that you actually enjoy, where your zone of genius is. And if there's one thing that is always something to remember, the better the experience, the better people are going to talk about you and your podcast or your business or whatever it might be. And so, really, even focusing on creating experience, even for your guest, can be super impactful. And then now you can take all these ideas and apply them in your business. I know a lot of you guys are business owners. So, taking these same automation ideas and these key elements of scheduling and intake and asking the right questions and sharing information at the right time is just going to create a better experience all around for you and for your brand. So, streamlining your guest bookings, you're going to be using lead captures and schedulers to really get that experience started and scheduled on the calendar. And then you're going to utilize those automated email reminders and scheduler reminders to keep them prepped, keep them engaged leading up to your interview date. And then you can customize your follow-up flows with emails, reminders, or tasks to really just encapsulate the experience. Okay, before I open up questions, in case anyone needs to hop off or needs to leave, that was probably the fastest webinar I've ever done. And I feel like I slowed it down a little bit, but it wasn't as intensive as some of the other ones. I really wanted this to be something you can take and run with it and apply it right now, right? And see a quick win from it. So if this is exciting you and you want some more information or education, or you just want to connect with me, I do have a free library. I will drop it in the chat, and I'm sure you guys can get that received in the follow-up email for the replay, or you can just follow me on Instagram and see that at chanelney.com. I do have a free library with a ton of info, and it does include a free feedback form that's beautifully designed. So if you want to create one of those intake questionnaires like I showed, go to my free library, download the free form design. It's a one-click template, and you can customize that for your guest intake. So that way you're not trying to spend time figuring out how to make it look good. You can just take my questions you saw on the slides and then use the free template, and boom, you have a guest intake questionnaire in less than an hour. Also, as a thank you for listening, whether you're live or if you're listening to the replay, I would love to give you 30% off one item in my shop with the code podcast. Again, chanellee.com to see that. And as you guys know, one last thing before we open up questions, the Dubsado sale is coming up on the 29th. So if you are not someone who is actually signed up for Dubsado, or if you are on a month-to-month plan, or you want to upgrade to Premier, November 29th through December 3rd, biggest Dubsado sale they've had, 50% off, and you can stack my code on top of the cumulative price. So save my code Chanel and Lee, or follow me and I'll remind you when the sale is on, because you can get your Premier plan next year for $140, which is so insane. So hopefully this got you really excited to get into Dubsado, start customizing it and using it for your podcast and your business. With that being said, I'll open up questions. I'll also have Dubsado open. So if there's something you want me to go back and show or explain, regardless if it's podcast or not, we can do that now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Taylor. I love your process because you have thought of just about everything and it's extremely clean. So I was very excited to have you on here. And currently, there's really not too many questions, I think, in the chats. I think folks were happy to sit back and watch you work your magic with basically having it all templated out, which is fantastic here. Although Nikki just chatted in, let's see here. Nikki was just saying that it was fantastic and thanks for sharing. And she hopes to connect with you later. She wants to learn more about your store, but let's see. Oh, how you set up your store. So that's a little bit of a different topic, actually. Maybe you can connect with Nikki later to talk about how you got about setting up your store, which could definitely be beneficial for anybody hosting a podcast if you are selling some things on the side as well, if you're running that podcast there. But
yeah, Nikki, if you want to send me a DM, I'm happy to send you a voice note and kind of go into detail. It's not using Dubsado, unfortunately, but that's okay. You know, we have different softwares for different things.
that is totally okay. And on that point, actually, my girlfriend works in the podcasting space as well. And I can say that Riverside, if you're someone who's in podcasting and you don't use Riverside, definitely give that a look too, because she uses it all the time and loves it. So I know you mentioned that as well. Just wanted to call it out there. None of the non-Dubsado software, but what works, works. And I can't complain about that. I had a question for you though, Taylor. I wanted to hear your thoughts on this. So if you are in that first flow where you're sending out your scheduler to invite the guest to actually come on, I know Dubsado's workflows are a little bit difficult to remind folks to go ahead and book, but how do you go about doing that if somebody has received the scheduler, but they have yet to book and you maybe want to encourage them to book? I know that the entire title of this webinar is to not chase guests, but what's your perspective on that?
That's a really good question. So yes, for those who don't know, and maybe this is something we're going to request it and put it out in the air again. We need an action for if something has not been scheduled, but that doesn't exist yet. So we do have workarounds. Now, there is a way to create a separate workflow where you can kind of pause things and start another workflow based on a certain time frame. I usually don't recommend it unless you are a little bit more advanced, because it can be a little confusing. So if you are a specialist or someone who feels really good in here, feel free to message me and I can explain that, but it can get a little hairy. So for my people who are like, I want to automate this, but I don't want it to be too confusing, normally what I would do is actually set a task and create that action to remind me in, let's say, 5 days to go in and check on the project, right? So I could create something that says like, check to see if, client name has booked their episode. And then I can set that for a time frame I feel like is good. Maybe it's 5 days, and we'll set that for after we've sent the appointment scheduler. So it is kind of manual, as in it's obviously not going to resend in 5 days after we've sent it, but this does give you that little, reminder. And most of us, I think, as podcast hosts, we're pretty on the ball of who's booked, who hasn't. So we can always go into that project and double check. The great thing about it, let me see if I have a test I can open up. Oh, no, we'll just create one real quick. Okay, let's just create a quick little test and I'll show you. So if we do send a scheduler in that workflow, we've sent it to the client and we haven't heard from them, we're going to see that appointment as a pending appointment because the workflow has sent it and now we're waiting on that client to book it. So I'm just going to add this in here. So we would see something like this. You get that task reminder saying, "Hey, go check in on Susie to see if she's, booked the pod." If she hasn't, I can go ahead and resend this to her super easily. It'll pop open the email. If I'm on the app and on the go and I see that reminder, I can go into the app and I can send that to her. Or I could even open this up and copy the direct link. Maybe she's a friend or I'm in the DMs. I'm like, "Hey, please don't forget." I can go do this manually. So although it's not completely automated, it's still with how Dubsado is set up, it makes it so easy to just go in and resend something because it's already there.
Yeah, no, I think all the things you just said are exactly how I would honestly recommend setting it up as well. And like you said, putting out into the universe, we here at Dubsado are really aware that we need to add that extra trigger essentially into workflow that's hopefully coming down the pipe. But I'm not trying to call us out, but I know that this is a functional space and it's a functional workflow. So this is a real situation that some of our attendees might run into if they're trying to get folks to schedule. But no, I love that example too, where you're going into the project, and especially with the mobile app, which you just mentioned, is a really good use case for just popping in, resetting that same link. And if you actually on your screen share, go back to that guest submission or start the guest booking workflow that you have right there on the page. So if you are somewhat familiar with Dubsado workflows, the nice thing about sending that link from the project again is it's going to be the exact same link that the workflow already sent, which means that your next actions in that flow are still going to trigger just fine. It's going to trigger exactly the same way that it was. Whereas if you try to resend that link in the workflow, it's creating a different link, which you may want to keep an eye on. That's kind of the snafu there with sending in the workflow. So getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty there with we're setting reminders, but it's an important thing to know how to do. I think if you're someone who wants to set up your Dubsado to actually be functional and book guests and kind of deal with some of those slight variables that might come up here and again. But I appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah. And I just thought of another one too that I've run into sometimes is, rescheduling, which happens very often. Again, if
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
not a paid client, reschedules are going to happen. So you have to be flexible. And so the great thing is once an appointment is confirmed, you can send that link, rescheduling link to the client or the guest in this scenario, again, from the app, from desktop, whatever it might be. And the workflow is still, and the workflow and the reminders are still going to be watching that original link. So when they reschedule, those workflow touch points from the booking and for the automated reminders are going to be based on that reschedule date. So instead of deleting
Having to restart it.
the
Yeah,
appointment and then adding a new one and having to do all that, sending that reschedule link is so easy. And I love that you can do it from the app. I use it all the time now. And everything else will still stay the same. So you're not having to go back and change a bunch of reminders and dates.
totally. No, that's a really good point to bring up as well. It's fantastic. Cool. Like I said, I know this is a little bit of on the shorter end of things for a webinar here, but I want to give it just another minute or two and see if there are any other questions from our attendees. But otherwise, Taylor, fantastic job as always. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
I think that's like I said, my gut tells me that the folks who are in attendance here, maybe the folks that didn't quite make it to attendance but waiting for the replay are just like, you know what? Taylor's going to have it on lock, so I'm just going to see what she's got in her slides and take it from there, which is totally fine. But again, let's see. Amy posts or asks, can we watch Taylor's other Dubsado trainings? Yeah, Amy, good question. So I won't include it in the follow-up email for this particular webinar just because other folks might get confused while we're linking additional webinars, but they're all available on our YouTube channel. And going forward, since we're here on Zoom now, we've changed our webinar platform. From here on out, any webinar that occurs will also be found on our events page and our past events. So you can always find it from our landing page on Zoom. But if you're like, hey, I don't know where that is, just go to YouTube, our YouTube channel under our Dubsado Specialists playlist. You will always have the availability or the option to find old webinars there as well. So go ahead and check those out.
Yes. And I'll add one thing to that,
Sure.
Amy and anyone else. I also have all the Dubsado webinars are linked to my website that I've done, but I do have some master classes on Dubsado that were not Dubsado hosted that are
Sure.
in the free library. So that library I mentioned, it has everything in there from one-click templates to master classes I've done on automation and client experience and other Dubsado kind of tips and tricks in there. So it really is mostly a Dubsado library of goodies. So be sure you go and check that out too.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know that that link is in your slides, but let me just go ahead and throw your website in here just in case somebody just wants to grab the quick link. This is just Taylor's full website, but it's there under your that free resources tab, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Fantastic. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. let's see here. Amy responded. She was just trying to figure out how to set this up and loves the idea of creating a separate brand to help with some of the things I couldn't figure out. Yeah, I think that point, I know you mentioned at the very outset there, Taylor, but that's something that I think is really beneficial for a lot of business owners, especially folks who are like, yeah, I've been using Dubsado, but now I have this other piece that I want to tack on there. In a lot of cases, it might make sense to create a separate brand because if it's a distinct enough business, it really helps keep things compartmentalized. If you yourself are watching this or watching the replay and you were in that boat and you can't decide if you should have it in one brand or not, I would encourage you very much so to send our customer care team a chat, and we'll be more than happy to help you kind of shine some light in the dark corners and think about all the different things that might affect whether you should or shouldn't do that. So we'll be happy to help you. In a lot of cases, the answer is yes. A separate brand is totally the way to go, and it's very cheap to tack that on to your subscription. Like I said, $10 a month. So really good point there, Amy, and hopefully this has been helpful. Cool.
Yeah, and I love that. I choose the separate brands because of the domain can say my podcast name and the email. Like those are two huge things for
Big
me. I want to
ones.
make sure my email communication has the podcast email and not myself since it's not directly associated with my business. So I think the $10 is worth it for that like complete cohesive branded portal touch point everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because you get all that. You can customize the C name. Like you said, the email is probably the biggest one. That's obvious. So yeah, it does make sense in a lot of scenarios. But if, like I said, if you have questions, send us a chat. We'll be happy to help you out there. Fantastic. Okay. And Nikki, yeah, of course
Amazing.
I would include that there. Sweet. Taylor, thank you very, very much. Much appreciated. Anybody who's watching, keep an eye out on our emails for the recording and Taylor's slides in just a couple hours here. And otherwise, we will catch everyone on the very next webinar. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
guys.
Taylor, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.